I wanted to get into this, another state being the victim of Republican politics that are either based on some sort of religious insanity, and by religious I mean belief in something that for which there is no evidence. In this case, it's Reaganomics, trickle-down economics, supply-side economics, conservative economics, neoliberal economics. They all mean the same thing, basically. Or if it's not an actual religious belief in that, and I think in the case of Sam Brownback, it probably actually was, because he just kept cutting taxes in Kansas and saying, you just wait. He came right out and said, I'm going to cut taxes like crazy on rich people in Kansas. And of course, this is, where the Koch brothers live, or at least one of them. He says, I'm going to keep cutting taxes on rich people, and you will see how prosperous our state will be. And Kansas is in the absolute crapper right now. I mean, it's in the toilet. It is really in bad shape. Bobby Jindal did the same thing in Louisiana. I went through that in some detail yesterday on this program. And, he left the state. I mean, he so buried the state down in Louisiana. They're having to stop programs to investigate child abuse. They can't afford to pay the people who investigate child abuse in Louisiana. They can't afford to treat their sewage. They're not going to be able to keep their schools open for another month or two. Because Bobby Jindal wanted to be president of the United States, and he figured the way to do it was to inflict on Louisiana Reaganomics, because after all, Ronald Reagan was a great president, wasn't he? No. He was one of the worst presidents in the history of the United States, and more people in his administration were indicted, convicted, or imprisoned for actual felonious crimes than any other president in the history of the United States. I mean, they've erected the Reagan Legacy Project, funded by a whole bunch of very wealthy conservatives, has erected these statues to Ronald Reagan all over the country. Every time I go out to National Airport, there's Ronald Reagan standing out in front going, this big statue of Ronald Reagan. I want to hang a sign around his neck that says felon or whatever, some word to that effect. Felon. I mean, He went on television and said, I don't remember the Iran-Contra thing, but I guess I did it. Yeah, you sure did. So now it comes. So we've seen crazed Republicans. One of the latest headlines I just saw was about Maine. Paul LePage, Tea Party Republican, who keeps getting elected with less than half the vote because more than two people run for governor of Maine. And it's the only state that didn't see a net growth in solar jobs last year, and he's turning down solar money from the federal government, saying, "No, we're not gonna make use of that." We kind of like our fossil fuels here, or at least Paul LePage likes the money from the fossil fuel industry, would be my guess. But now it comes to Illinois. I met Pat Quinn, the former governor. I keynoted in Chicago a couple of years ago. When Quinn was the governor, I keynoted a conference or a meeting of, I forget which county it was, but it wasn't Cook County. It was one of the counties, one of the suburban Chicago counties, Democratic Party, big annual, I don't know if it was the Jefferson Jackson dinner or what, but it was, and he gave a great speech. I've only met him once, but I thought, you had a good governor there. And now in Illinois, you've got this Bruce Rauner guy, this rich right winger, and who, by the way, when he came into office, he pushed for a tax cut not to expire, and by not expiring the tax cut, he saved himself $750,000 in taxes, at least according to this piece by Tim Liberetti over at Politicus USA. The headline, Rauner tells Illinois Democrats if they won't punish the taxpayers, he will. The subhead, Rauner has chosen to plunder the state for his own private interests and those of his cronies. And, this is tough talk. But I believe this is solid stuff. This is Tim Liberetti writing over at Politicus USA. He writes, thus, while Rauner, first of all, he lays out the whole, the budget process, and, Rauner is fighting with the Democrats in the legislature and all this kind of stuff. And And he says, with no budget, agencies that provide vital services to Illinois citizens have received no monies this year and are shutting down. And the very existence of the state's public higher education system is threatened, as none of the state's higher education institutions have yet to receive the state appropriations they need to operate. Thus, while Rauner claims to be protecting the Illinois taxpayer, he is in fact defrauding taxpayers who pay taxes to ensure that their children are educated, to receive child care assistance so that they can work, to help their children with autism and other disabilities, to assist the homeless, the disabled, the infirmed, and the elderly, among other services their taxes support to help them take care of their families so they can be productive citizens. This is a guy who campaigned as being, it was essentially a Donald Trump campaign. I'm a rich businessman. I know how to get things done. Elect me and I'll run this state the way the way you'd run a business. Well, we see how that works. It doesn't work. I mean, Rick Snyder in Michigan, great example. Yeah, let's privatize the veterans facilities and, bring in minimum wage people, who used to work at Pizza Hut and have them be caring for vet, and fire and it's a disaster, among other things, Let's destroy democracy. I did this rant several days ago. We need not revisit it. I want to stay on Illinois. But Bruce Rauner campaigned as basically, I'm like Donald Trump. I'm a rich guy. Therefore, I know how to run things. And as Tim Liberetti writes, while defrauding the ordinary tax-paying citizen, it's not even clear that Rauner has served those 2/3 of Illinois corporations that pay no state taxes. Moody's and Fitch rating agencies have downgraded the state's bond and credit ratings because of these insane policies of Rauner's. Similarly, Rauner's recent vociferations about wanting to enact an emergency state takeover of the Chicago public school system and to declare bankruptcy resulted in the school system. I see he's following Rick Snyder in Michigan. It resulted in the school system having to pay a higher interest rate for a bond offering. Several state universities in Illinois just had their credit ratings downgraded by Moody's. This is not smart or responsible economic stewardship. This is crazy. Rauner has, quote, tied passage of the $36 billion budget to changes in collective bargaining rights for public employees and worker compensation. He's trying to do a Scott Walker. I'm not gonna sign off on this budget. I'm not gonna, fund these agencies unless we stick it to the state workers. And Tim asks, is there any evidence to suggest that weakening unions or curtailing collective bargaining is good for a state? Well, no, actually. And Rauner even wants these so-called right-to-work-for-less zones. He calls them economic empowerment zones. And what he's completely ignoring is that if you look at the states that are the right-to-work-for-less states, they're economically basket cases. And if you look at the states that are strong and heavily unionized and they have a strong economy, for the reason that guy that, maybe he wasn't actually Gordon Gekko. I'm getting some pushback in the chat room about that. But, that's what CNBC said. But, his point that you need people at the bottom of the economic ladder to be making it. Wisconsin now, after Scott Walker's reign, has the highest poverty rate in 30 years, 35th in the nation in anemic job growths. It's a disaster.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And Rauner wants to turn Illinois into a disaster. America is waking up. Thank God. We'll be back. I've just gotten started here on Bruce Rauner. Meanwhile, Rauner has also peddled two other, this again from Tim Libretti's piece on Politicus USA. Meanwhile, Rauner has peddled two other very damaging lies. He continues to assault state workers for Illinois budget problems, claiming they're overpaid, when in fact one study indicates state workers with bachelor's or graduate degrees earn 32 to 40% less money working for the state of Illinois than they would if they were in the private sector. To add salt to Illinois' wound, Tim writes, Rauner increased the salaries of his staff 24% over what Pat Quinn paid his staff, and he recently hired a chief of staff for his wife, Diana, who, by the way, has no official duties, at the cost of $100,000 a year to the taxpayers. What happened to state workers being overpaid? The other damaging lie, Tim notes, that Rauner tells, is that Illinois' taxes are unduly burdensome. Yet, as mentioned, 2/3 of Illinois corporations pay no taxes to the state whatsoever, or at least not, presumably not income taxes. And as the Illinois Economic Policy Institute indicates, Illinois state taxes are far lower than those in the surrounding states of Iowa, Missouri, Indiana, and Wisconsin. If Illinois had tax structures on par with any of those states, Illinois could take in billions more in revenue every year and not be in a fiscal crisis. Rauner cares as little about business as he does about the people of the state as he does about the truth. And this is just like one more example. This is some more of this. Rauner, I mentioned these right to work zones, and it says, since Rauner is merely seeking to replicate Scott Walker's union busting strategies, we don't have to guess at the outcome. Under Walker's reign, Wisconsin has the highest poverty rate in 30 years, ranks 35th in the nation in job growth, features a cost of doing business higher than the national average, and has slashed spending on education. Only those like the Kochs seem to benefit. The policies are not good for business or people overall. Likewise, Rauner seems to not serve business by creating a healthy climate and economy for business, but only to serve the wealthy like himself. He urged the Illinois legislature not to renew a 1.25% temporary tax increase. This is the one I mentioned at the beginning. I called it a tax cut. I was wrong. A 1.25 temporary tax increase that was expiring just before he took office. By letting this increase expire, the multimillionaire Rauner saved himself $750,000 in taxes, while those who earn an average of $50,000 a year in Illinois saved $50. And Rauner's telling them, I'm saving you money. I'm cutting your taxes. Right. This is trickle-down economics, and we're being told that it's just raining, right? No, it's not rain.